Is it possible to win a battle and lose the war? I'm Jim Lindsay, and this is Lessons Learned. Our topic today is the Tet Offensive, which began in late January 1968 and changed the direction of the Vietnam War. U.S. and South Vietnamese troops are hoping for a break from the fighting during that final week of January 1968. It was Tet, the beginning of the Lunar New Year, time of great celebrations in Vietnam. In previous years, both sides had observed a ceasefire to allow the country to celebrate its national holiday. But unbeknownst to the Americans and the South Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, the communist guerrillas operating in South Vietnam, had infiltrated towns and cities across the country. As the festivities for Tet began, they struck with ferocity, hitting targets like the Saigon International Airport, the Presidential Palace, and even the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. After the initial surprise wore off, U.S. and South Vietnamese forces responded with devastating effectiveness, repulsing the attackers and inflicting huge losses. The Viet Cong were broken as the military force for the remainder of the war. But while the United States military scored a victory on the battlefield at Tet, the effect at home was quite different. The fighting at Tet helped turn American public opinion against the war and persuaded Lyndon Johnson not to run for re-election. The discrepancy between what happened in Vietnam and what happened at home has generated a slew of books and articles arguing that the news media's coverage of the Tet Offensive turned the American public against the Vietnam War. To be sure, journalists got a lot of the facts wrong early on in the Tet Offensive. Most famously, journalists reported that the Viet Cong had invaded the U.S. Embassy, when in fact they had only managed to get onto the embassy's grounds. Many Americans were horrified to see a photo of a South Vietnamese Army general summarily executing a Viet Cong prisoner on the streets of Saigon. But the talk of how journalists covered the Tet Offensive misses the broader point. Context matters. Even before Tet, the American public had begun to sour on the Vietnam War. Polls done in the middle of the summer of 1967 showed that a majority of Americans had concluded that the decision to become involved in Vietnam had been a mistake. The Johnson administration responded to these poll numbers by launching a public relations campaign to build support for the war. That included bringing home the commanding U.S. general from Vietnam who told the American public that an important point had been reached where the end begins to come into view.
I am absolutely certain that whereas in 1965 the enemy was winning, today he is certainly losing.
Tet shattered the claim that the United States was making progress in South Vietnam. Americans began talking about a credibility gap because the Johnson administration had violated a cardinal rule of American politics: never overpromise and underdeliver. Preparing the public for setbacks and reversals is critical to succeeding with any foreign policy that requires a sustained political commitment. That lesson is worth keeping in mind as we talk about a potential military strike against Iran or intervening militarily in Syria. The American public will bear great burdens, but it wants to know what the costs are before the fighting begins. I invite you to join me in continuing the conversation at my blog, The Water's Edge. You can find it at www.cfr.org. Remember, historical events like the Tet Offensive provide powerful lessons and insights into the challenges we face today. Or as Nobel Prize-winning author William Faulkner wrote, "The past isn't dead, it isn't even past."